Let us start with your first project, the fish tank, which rejects the typical space of a rectilinear tank. So instead of mimicking the natural habitat by filling it with plants and rocks, you chose to redefine the living environment by creating an ambiguous space for the fish. So extending the fish tank to your built projects, can you expand on your architectural ideas?
It's a very early project. At the time, we didn't have any building project, so we had to do something. So this is a project in between art and design and architecture because it's a house for fish. It's also talking about how fish live in a space. At the same time, it examines how humans live in the city, and it, it shows how we think of a relationship between a life and a space. So I would say it's exercise before we do actual buildings. Of course, they're linked. Uh, this work and the later architecture, they all linked in terms of how we think about the meaning of architecture. I think architecture has a social meaning. It's not just a product. It's not only for the physical need, but it also has the power to to change how people think about the environment. In our later building project, we designed the space in the way to connect to the human spirit. It's very similar to how we designed the fish tank. It, uh, the fish tank was trying to transfer a typical cubic space into something playful, and I think it's better for fish. But fish, they don't say. It shows how we think about architecture.
Moving on from your fish tank to your next landmark project, the Absolute Towers, which has been very successful as an icon in Mississauga, Toronto. And apart from redefining the rectilinear geometry of the skyscraper through its sinuous profile, the typical plan continues to define the apartments. So how would you challenge the typical plan and perhaps redefine the long-standing tension between the external form and the internal organization?
I would say that the fish tank is much more extreme than architecture because a building is the basically we paid for the fish tank, and when you design a building, the architect cannot pay for a big building. The Mississauga Tower is a start from criticize of modern high rise, very similar to the fish tank that we criticizing modern philosophy, modern architecture, but in the end, the tower, the answer in the high rise, it's a very beautiful sculpture. It doesn't shake from inside yet. I would say it's a progress. That's maybe the reason this idea can become reality, and the fish tank cannot become a huge building because nobody gonna pay for that. But now we're trying to develop this idea further. So I would say fish tank is very early ideal project, but eventually I want to uh, realize step by step in architecture. So the Mississauga Tower was actually a way to criticizing modern towers. They're always showing the height, the strength, the power for the high-rise building. But Mississauga, the Absolute Tower, trying to make a soft, natural image for the high-rise. So from outside, in the urban context, you can already tell the difference between this building and the surrounding. And inside each unit, you have a big window, big balcony. You lost orientation because the organic shape of the building, and in the end, it's two tower shape, very unique urban space. So that I think that's the level this project has reached. That you criticizing something and you create something new, but something beautiful. A lot of people they like the project, but they didn't realize we start from criticizing. So they still think, oh, this is a beautiful project, nice curve. They like the curve. So, but this already a start. This is the way we criticizing the modern architecture. Actually after this project, we did the urban forest in Chongqing. That's another one I would say developed from the absolute towers. So this idea is being developed step by step.
In the urban forest, you mentioned that the project draws its inspiration from Oriental philosophy. Can you expand on how this philosophy is applicable to contemporary cities, and perhaps resist against a purely formal definition of the building, and on the other hand, a technological definition of sustainability?
In the Oriental philosophy, the living environment is a whole is a one concept. The building, the nature, all these elements are not separated, not isolated from each other. But modern city and architecture is built based on the function or efficiency or all these numbers. So architecture is architecture, planning is planning, landscape is a landscape. They become very different discipline. In the urban forest project, we try to create a high-rise in the city center, but you cannot tell it's a building or landscape. It's a high-rise without a clear shape. So you think this is a organic life. Of course, somebody creates this shape, but it feels like by accident. It's not from any formal shape. Instead, this shape come from inside, where you create these gardens, void, public space for people in the tower. A lot of a terrace, a lot of trees. So the building look very different from surrounding the city. Of course, it will become a landmark because it doesn't trying to become something. It's just trying to show the internal energy and people activity. So I think it's a development of the concept that people live together closely to the nature. I don't think you have to use high technology to create a sustainable building, but even sustainable building it doesn't mean it's a nice space for people to integrate with the nature. Because I see a lot of modern green building. It looks like a machine, very modern box, same as many the architecture from 50s. But maybe because they're using better technology, better material, they become green building. But I'm sure people living there, working in there, they don't necessarily feel they're in a better environment, or I think that's what also something I was inspired from traditional architecture, like traditional gardens. You live in that environment, you close to the nature, but all this architecture and the nature mixed environment is about how to create a poetic, spiritual space. It's not about a tree or grass, water. So when the master put all these elements together in a very special way, this garden has a meaning. So this garden become a social or a cultural space for people. And this is important. I think if you try to judge those traditional gardens by masters, of course, they're green architecture. They using very basic material, basic natural ventilation, everything. But I think they become cultural heritage today, not only because they're green architecture, because they have cultural meaning. I think that's the only thing can link to human. If we're talking about humanity, all the numbers is very abstract, but this is something people can feel. That kind of feeling, I think, is something we try to explore in modern or large-scale urban project.
So compared to your previous projects which deal with greening the urban environment, several of your recent projects like Orders Museum, Huangshan Mountain Village, and so on, they actually urbanize the natural environment, and they all seem to read as landscapes rather than objects. So how important is it to blend architecture with the environment?
I think nature is always very beautiful. So build something into this beautiful nature. You have to be very careful. If you build a small building, maybe it's easier because in the very large, beautiful environment, a small building doesn't matter too much. It's a good building or bad building. But now we're talking about in China, we doing a lot of urbanization and the new buildings in this context. In most cases, they're large buildings, residential buildings, large museums. So that's why I think it's very difficult to throw some random thing into this beautiful context. We have to be very careful that your building can have a conversation with surrounding. The Huangshan village is an example because Huangshan village they have a very beautiful scenery, but the building has to be big. It has a lot of people live in there. We try to make the building become a group of buildings, not like one big tower or two big towers. From the beginning, master plan, we try to blend them into the landscape. And the language-wise, also trying to use contour lines, this very free horizontal lines. So the building look like grow out of the mountains. The Erdos Museum is different actually. It's not nothing look like existing nature. The museum itself look very abstract. It's a big object, but the landscape is something we try to reference the previous landscape before they urbanized. It's look like a desert, like a Kobe. When you put this very future object onto this landscape, it feels there's a time gap, to link the past. That the landscape have been there forever, and something belongs to the future. Link these two together, so it looks very dramatic, and it doesn't show anything similar to modern urban context. It doesn't have a tree, it doesn't have a grass, it doesn't have anything. that you can see from the normal city. So when the current become absent, you don't feel anything belongs to the current. So I think this dialogue is more important.
Your Ordos Museum was completed at a time when Ordos was infamously becoming a ghost city, filled with empty, unoccupied buildings. So what do you think is the role of the architect working within such speculative conditions, and how can it respond to the current emptiness and future inhabitation?
I think the ghost city is a not architecture term. It's a more like a economy issue. I think they didn't run the economy so well, but I think China needs cities. So I think still a lot of people are moving from countryside to the new cities. So I think city need a public space, need a public building for sure. But in China, a lot of cultural building, public building, become purely monument or landmark as a monument in the city center. They don't actually encourage public life or public activity. They just being very special. Erdos Museum is a special look. It's different from other building. But at the same time, this abstract random object in the site is not actually very important how it looks, because every time I go there, actually a lot of people sitting on this waving landscape and somebody sleeping there, a lot of kids running around. I think this desert look landscape is very welcoming to people. A lot of people, they feel playful, so they go there, sit there, and the building become background. They come here because of the space, not because of some striking image of the building. So I think that's something I was satisfied with. I think a public building needs to find a new way to engage the public, encourage people to gather and to communicate.
Your idea of nature as a social ideal and a tool for future urban development can be best summarized in your Shanshui City exhibition, which incidentally also marks 10 years of practice for MAD. So we're just curious, how would you write the next chapter for your coming decade of practice?
I think the early practice was more about instant reaction to the context I was working in, like a social context, cultural context, or even what I was interested. I don't know. It's very instant reaction. The Shanshui concept is a recent concept, but it's somehow related to everything we said before about nature, about human, about emotion, about imperfection. It's not mature theory yet. That will keep us busy for next years, I think, to figure out what we're talking about. In theory, also at the same time in the real buildings, because we are doing practice and we discover some thinking from the practice. This is different from you have a theory first and then you apply it to your practice. We're doing the both at the same time. So the practice itself is experimental. We discover a lot of new things in our real project. Now we're doing several large-scale urban projects, and we're imagining what's a Shanshui city could be in this project, how this idea can direct or can suggest a totally new urban environment in this situation. In 6-7 years, we will finish this project because they're so huge. And when people go there, they will tell if this is very different, this is successful or not. And then we will tell. So it's very exciting for me to take the risk and to use all these years or time to examine what we're talking about. That's the plan to do in the next 10 years.